This session will be moderated by Carina Cho. Carina is the CEO of Mobilize and also an associate at Context Ventures. Carina helped make this event happen the first year and in subsequent years. We're joined by three awesome veterans, Isaac Oats of JustWorks, Steve Gilman of One Range, and Jake Wood of Groundswell. I'll quickly do a very, very quick intros on these folks, and then would ask that Carina take this over. First is Jake Wood. If you don't know him, he was one of the founders of Team Rubicon, one of the most important nonprofit veteran service organizations of the past few years, if not decade. They do incredible work in terms of nation building at home. And he's got an incredible journey that he's going to share with us. Then we got Steve Gilman. He was a DIA agent, then Navy Reserves, and has now been building One Range. We're fortunate enough to be investors in them. And then there's Isaac Oats, who started JustWorks, and JustWorks is one of the largest HR companies in the space. And he took time out of his very, very busy schedule to come out here. Carina, the mic is yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, everyone, and all the panelists for being here. It's really exciting to see some familiar faces and new ones as well. I hope everyone's enjoying the conference. Like Tim mentioned, I'm part of the Context team, and then I'm also the CEO of Mobilize, a marketing and advertising agency. So I think let's just go down the line. If you can give a quick background and then tell us about your company, what problem you were trying to solve.
Cool. Hi, everybody. I'm Isaac. So JustWorks is a payroll benefits and HR company. We're based in New York, and we are focused on businesses that typically have less than 100 employees. We started about 12 years ago. We've got about 12,000 companies that use us with about 180,000 employees total. The basic idea is that we can put all these companies together and get them access to better benefits, better HR services, and so on.
Great. Hey, Steve Gilman, co-founder and CEO of One Range. We're leaders in employee-driven upskilling. So we have an AI-curated skills development platform. We've been in market and have been developing our customer base and building. We currently have users, employees of those companies in 27 different countries. And we love the challenge of making sure that people get the right skills at the right time, which obviously is very critical for what we do. We also have just a fraction of 180,000 people on JustWorks. I also built on JustWorks my first business, and it's been awesome. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, hi, everybody. Jake Wood. I am a JustWorks customer as well. That might be the most important. And a multi-time JustWorks customer. If you're not on JustWorks, you're wrong. Today, I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Groundswell. We build enterprise technology that helps companies curate their social impact efforts. So 4 real primary products. We have an employee giving platform that makes tax-advantaged giving accounts an employee benefit, like an HSA for giving, employee volunteering, corporate grant making, and an employee assistance fund. We work with companies that range in size from 50 to 55,000, and are kind of at an interesting part in our journey. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. So we have a lot of founders. I know we did a show of hands in the previous panels, and being a founder also means leading a team. So it might be a loaded question, but how do you think employees are feeling right now in just this general economy?
Well, sure. I'll take the first crack at this. I think that the labor market's going through like a couple of pendulum swings. I think probably an obvious statement. I was just having this conversation off to the side. I think 2020, 2021, we saw peak employee kind of power grab, where employees held all of the power in that dynamic within that relationship. That was kind of the boom times for HR-related software. Companies were throwing everything at these employees to attract them, to retain them. You had this laundry list of bullet point benefits that they were providing. And then obviously that dynamic has shifted. I think what we're seeing now is that pendulum has swung back toward employers having power in that dynamic and in that relationship. The numbers just came out this week about the quit rate which I think was at 2% for the last quarter, which is historically really, really low. It's an indication that people are afraid to quit their job because they are worried about their prospects of the next one. So, I mean, I think it's an interesting time to be a founder. I think it's an interesting time to be an employer. Certainly if you are in HR tech, and really I think anybody that pretends to know where that pendulum ends up over time is probably fooling themselves, because there's probably some surprises around the corner.
Absolutely. Traditionally, we've seen the market go back and forth, and employers take power or employees take power, and it shifts. I would say the general employee base across the country is just confused, right? The idea there is that if you've ever had a 22-year-old just out of school full stack engineer pitch for a salary that's 3 times what you think they should be making, right? Older generation. That's not their fault. That's what was happening when they were coming out of school. We've also seen people that if 3 years ago you went to an HR tech conference, the biggest thing was benefits and perks. We'll pay for coffee, we'll pay for Equinox, we'll pay for a financial advisor to every employee. And while I think that stuff is great, there's no way it doesn't swing back, and didn't when did swing back when things had to tighten up and we got back to traditional business being more productive. And so the idea of employees being resilient or nervous or how does this look, the best employees will thrive, but it doesn't mean people aren't going to be confused or not being able to understand the labor market or where they're going to end up next.
Yeah, I mean, I think the word uncertainty certainly comes to mind for me, and I think you see it in the confusion. For us, we see both employees come and go at the companies on our platform, and we see companies come and go. And the general situation right now is less people are coming and going. So I think, to your point about the quit rate, I think that's right. I think people are less certain and less likely to make moves, and I think you see it potentially in your sales results, and you also see it in kind of like your labor market.
Given that you guys are all in the HR space, I would hope and imagine that all your employees would give you 10 out of 10, right, on performance reviews. How are you empowering your own teams? And then when you were building your company and starting this journey, what are some challenges that you got faced?
Yeah, I think, for us, so we started, it's funny, like we're an HR company and we made lots of the same HR mistakes that I think any company makes. We adopted an employee manual way too late. And our performance reviews used to be Microsoft Word documents for a really long time that just kind of got emailed around. I think we have now our team is about 1,500 people, so it's pretty sizable, and our systems, of course, are much more mature. And, our real focus is on making sure that we're having the right conversation with our employees and that they're having the right conversation with us. And so that means that they understand what the expectations are, that we're clear about the expectations, and that we're clear about whether they're meeting them or not, and then that we kind of understand what they want. And so I think it's related a little bit to kind of the up and down or left and right that you were just talking about. But right now the focus is really just on a clear conversation, clear process, simple and lightweight. We've had some really heavy stuff. People say, continuous feedback until you implement continuous feedback, and then they're like, for the love of God, please stop.
So somebody read Radical Candor once, and they thought that's what they wanted until they received some Radical Candor. Imagine that.
But yeah.
One Range is a marketplace, and so we see the most popular books. As of 3 months ago, Kim Scott's Radical Candor was the most popular, and then there's a sequel to it. So that's a first-time manager saying, I'm stepping up into these shoes to do this. And whether they implement that or not, I would guess the percentage is smaller that actually look to give that type of feedback. Similar to what Isaac said, with a little bit of a twist, and we're not 1,500 people with all the systems, but the way we're building is to have a hierarchy with Olympians as employees. So you have to be the best at what you do to be on our team. That's what we vet for, that's what we interfere for, and you want to grow into that role. We also try to make it as flat as possible. So when you have a question or need to work with someone, it doesn't matter what level of the organization they are at, what their role is, their experience, their age, or anything else. That person is responsible for working with you. And I think that goes really well. It empowers people to believe that the main leadership that is thrown around companies every once in a while is a characteristic, not actually a level. And that's, I realize I'm talking to folks that have come out of the military or government and have seen leadership be an 04 or up, or a GS-15 and up, right, for the civilians. That's not who we do it. So when we recruit, we look for leadership skills and we look to empower those, and at the end of the day, just get out of the way and help people work together. And then it manifests itself, hopefully, in continuous feedback and performance management reviews.
I think we're also a small team. We've got about just under 20 folks full time, and so how do we get the most out of them? The last couple of years have been tough. We peaked at, I think, 36 employees. So like many of the startups out there, we went through some really painful cuts. We really cut down to the bone. And so then how do you retain the people that you want to retain? How do you align them, and how do you maximize what you get out of them? I think one of the things that Isaac said is, this need for clarity. As a leader, it's really critical that you provide that clarity to everyone in your organization, regardless if you have 20 or 20,000 employees. Clarity of roles, clarity of mission, clarity of objectives. If you have 20 people on your team and they aren't clear in what they should be doing or what it is that they're doing, how it's impacting that mission, then you're absolutely failing them, particularly at a time when everybody feels uncertain, because that uncertainty leads to fear, that fear leads to irrational thinking and decisions and behavior and all of those things. So you have to constantly reinforce that clarity. You do that through, having smart meetings, revisiting those objectives. But one of the most important things that you can do is just not hide things from your team. We just went through, everybody, the entire economy just went through a really rough, crazy 2 years of inflation. Our team, we were radically transparent with them about the situation that we were facing. We trusted them with the truth. Hey, we're running low on money. Hey, the pipeline isn't as thick as it needs to be. Hey, we're not hitting our revenue targets. Hey, if we don't do these things, we might have to go through cuts again. We trusted them with that information. Right? And because we had that level of transparency with them, they trusted the plan, right? They felt inspired to show up every day and work. And now, as a result, like, we've gotten on the other side of that. We just raised more money. Our pipeline is full. We're hitting our revenue milestones. But I think that transparency and that clarity was so key to that in those really hard moments.
I love that. And just to jump in, whenever you share this type of information, do it the right way as a leader, as Jake is talking about, if you have the right people, we talked a lot about ownership today, giving them the transparent facts and not just the good but the bad. Hey, we have X amount of time unless we do this. The right people step up. That's empowering, right? Someone goes home and says, dang, we're gonna get the job done. And if they don't, you don't have the right person, right? That's a recruiting issue. It's a scaled out of it issue, but the best way to, I think that's fantastic. That's awesome.
Yeah, I think about some of the most memorable points over the past 10 years, and a lot of them are, an all-hands meeting that starts, about like this, and basically having to cover a really tough topic. And there are certain things that, I think a lot of times entrepreneurial leaders don't really talk about with their team, like how their cap table works, for example, is often kind of behind the curtain. And my experience 100% of the time has been that if you talk with your team and you expect them to receive the information like adults, they will come back just like that, and you can get so much more out of them, and you build this trust over the long term. But I think hiding stuff, it just doesn't work in the end.
Jake, with Groundswell, you put a focus on employee volunteering and giving back. What's the importance of building a culture of giving within a team? And, based on the feedback of your clients, what do they want to see more of?
Yeah, well, I started Groundswell after running Team Rubicon for 11 years. And while running Team Rubicon, we raised, over the last 15 years, we've raised close to $500 million. And I'd say 70% of that was from corporate America. And a lot of the volunteering that we did was in partnership with corporate America. So I saw how bad the systems were that they were using to engage their employees. And, I always thought that was unfortunate, because I'm kind of like one of these perpetually optimistic and positive human beings, which most people maybe would, I don't know, my wife would probably disagree with that now that I say that out loud. But I believe everyone is better when people are being generous, because when people are being generous, in whatever form that might take, their time, their talent, their treasure, they're thinking about something other than themselves. And that's the type of team that I want to be on, right? Is a team where I have a bunch of people who aren't in that what's in it for me mentality. They're thinking about someone else, right? And so if you can demonstrate, in my experience, if you can demonstrate that you care about your community, you care about your family, you care about the world writ large, in addition to yourself, I always think you're going to tend to be a better teammate on the average. And so, that's part of what we're looking to unlock. Corporate philanthropy is kind of a long-held activity within corporate America. For 150 years, it's been the norm for blue chip companies to give back in one shape or another. And we think that will continue as a trend. America is the most philanthropic country on earth. Second place isn't even close. We give away $500 billion a year in this country to charity, $500 billion a year to charity. Corporate America only accounts for about $25 billion of that. So there's just huge potential there to expand. There's also huge potential when we think about how do we align people, how do we inspire that next generation that's confused. We consistently see that younger generations, Millennial and Gen Z, they want to have an impact in the world beyond just making a profit through what they do. I'll be honest, I don't think they actually know what that means, right? I think they say that. I think they're yet to really define what that means, but I think for the companies that figure out how to demonstrate to Gen Z and Millennials that they can help them to accomplish that, they're gonna win the best talent. And I think we're gonna get into an era where accessing the absolute best talent is gonna be increasingly hard with things like AI and stuff like that. So I just, that's kind of our view of the world.
Has there ever been a divisive situation where maybe, how do you make sure that, what you're giving back and what you're targeting really aligns with a certain company's morale?
Well, this is you guys probably know this, right? When you're a founder or an entrepreneur and you're building your product, you have all these hills that you're willing to die on, right? About your product, about how your business is going to run. And one of the hills that I was killed on multiple times was I didn't want to give companies the ability to restrict what charities their employees could donate to. I felt like they should be empowered to give wherever they wanted, and it was inappropriate for a company to be the arbiter of what was a good cause and a bad cause. And boy, I lost a lot of business because of that. I still think it's a really slippery slope. Our data still suggests that it's an order of magnitude difference in participation between companies that have highly restricted choice in where employees can participate and those that don't. The biggest driver of participation is whether or not you allow your employees to donate to houses of worship, which is about 65% of individual giving in the country today. And so as we advise companies through their implementations, we really encourage them to take this lens of, you should be doing this to acknowledge and respect the diverse backgrounds of your employees. Because philanthropy is deeply personal, it's informed by someone's lived experience. And so if you really want this program to resonate with your employees, you will back them in whatever it is that they want to support. Now, we have mechanisms to protect the company from reputational risk in doing that. But that was one of those product hills that I died on, and now we've built really smart tools to help companies restrict it if they choose. We just advise them not to, and show them the receipts.
Awesome. I think it will be really helpful for the founders in the room if each of you can tell the audience who your target companies are, what kind of clients work best with your company.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, our focus in a general sense is businesses under 100 employees, but I'll be more specific. Our general view in the HR and payroll space is that, I'm reading, I see Crossing the Chasm right here. Crossing the Chasm says that you start with small businesses so you can work your way up to enterprise. And that has happened in our space as well. And so for us, we kind of figure if we can stay really focused on small businesses and medium-sized businesses and make sure that we're investing in our product to be the best for them, even if we're not playing at all with really large businesses, that's okay. So, our businesses on average have about 15 employees, like I mentioned. About 20 or 25% are venture-backed. So there's definitely a heavier concentration in tech, but by no means is it the majority. And we've done the best with white-collar businesses, kind of writ large. And we're thinking a lot about how we can expand that. It's a really complicated question. But obviously, there are lots of businesses out there, and we want to make sure we can serve as many as possible.
Awesome. Yeah, One Range works with companies that employ knowledge workers for the most part. So if you're sitting in front of a desk looking at a laptop all day, you need the kind of upskilling that we provide, which is a marketplace of content from around the globe. Let's say normally like our sweet spot is 100 to 1,000 person company, technology agencies, IT consulting, things like that, and then we take care of everyone and the learning and development budget of those companies. The reason that's a target for us and it works so well is that's the range in when companies really start thinking about skill development and upskilling, right? There's a huge case for retention and attracting talent, becoming more productive, and there's not many tools that actually focus on allowing you to do that efficiently. We also have tools for companies under 100, not too dissimilar from Groundswell. If you're under 100, you go on our website, sign up, and launch it. You don't get the customizations and restrictions that an HR team might get at 500, but we also have companies that range up to 5,000 that are global. And what we saw, which was different than our original thesis, is we thought we'd be heavy in engineering teams. We'd sell to a VP of engineering and work just with that division. Turns out our marketplace caters to leadership management, books for first-time managers, business applications, Figma, Excel, PowerPoint. Everybody needs this kind of stuff. And so we target those companies that do a really good job investing in their people. And our promise is we can take care of every person at your company with our product.
Yeah, we've been on an interesting journey, kind of discovering our ICP. So when we first launched the company, it was 2021. It was that peak employee power, right? And companies were throwing benefits at employees. And so we thought that in our observation of the market, the enterprise landscape, companies 10,000 employees and up, was dominated by 3 legacy players in our sector. And so the mid-market and SMB space was pretty blue ocean for us. And so we built a product that could be easily implemented by an SMB, and we went to market selling philanthropy as an employee benefit, targeting HR leaders at those companies. And it was a bloodbath. Because by the time our product got to market, that pendulum had started to swing back, benefits were being cut, and if a company didn't have a philanthropy program before a high inflation environment, they certainly weren't going to get convinced to launch one in the middle of a high inflation environment. So it forced us to really aggressively accelerate our move into enterprise, and so that coincided with the cut I mentioned earlier. We retooled our roadmap, and we basically put our heads down and built out an enterprise-capable platform that could compete with those 3 legacy players, each of which are unicorn-sized companies. And so today, we primarily work with enterprise companies. We don't really define that. We're pretty industry agnostic. We work with major U.S. banks. We work with we're about to go live with a major U.S. retailer. We work with blue-collar companies that have large deskless populations as well. It's been a pretty fascinating journey. The through line on all of them is that they have had committed, community give-back programs for years or decades, right? And now we're just making that more efficient. We're helping them to get more bang for their buck at that employee level to help make it more sustainable.
Question for you, Steve. So I personally think professional development is so important, and we spoke yesterday, and then we also heard from panels earlier today. Sometimes when times are tough in the economy, professional development is the first thing to be cut. So what would your response be to that, and why do you think it's so important to keep that on?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's kind of a few answers to that. If I'm talking to an investor, the answer is the market is huge, it's getting bigger, but it does ebb and flow. It's cyclical with the market. So when learning and development gets pulled back at companies, because a variety of reasons, the first thing that gets cut, the CFO says, no, we don't need this, people can figure out other ways. Okay, we're in the space because we're trying to change the world for the employees and the users that we have, the companies we serve. When it flows back in, you want to be the vendor at the right time, at the right place to capture those dollars. Now, in order to do this, and this is how we talk to the customers, it needs to be done efficiently. So the reason that it gets cut and gets pulled back is because it's really hard to tie the dollars to the ROI with people sticking around and getting better at their job, just because the incumbent tools out there that have been out there for the past 20 years kind of look the same. Licensed content, online courses, hopefully my employees take this and they consider it professional development. Hasn't been our approach, and so we're starting to catch the flow now as it comes in, because there was a huge ebb in that, and not only did we see budgets pulled back, but we saw people operations leaders get cut, right? So there's actually no one to sell to at that time. Now that it's coming back, and granted with more efficiency lens, the goal is to get people more productive, and it's stabilizing even if it's not a big boom. And so we're here at the right time to get into the landscape and make sure things are efficient, so the next time for our customers, when things flow back, they have just as much justification for professional development at their company as do the salespeople when they say we need our CRM and we need to continue to pay Salesforce. So that's our goal.
I'm curious, I want to hear from all of you, but specifically to Isaac. With JustWorks, you have a focus on payroll, benefits, HR. We've seen HR develop and evolve throughout the years, right? Has there been a time in your company where you've kind of pivoted your focus? And then in the future, in the next 5 to 10 years, how do you see it kind of changing?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a blog post from Fred Wilson that came out around the time we started our company, and it's called like The Pivot or The Grind. And what I would always tell people was we were the grind. So the general view when we started was we wanted to make it really easy for entrepreneurs to hire and pay people. Like this was like a first thing that you had to do after you raised money. We just wanted it to be easy. A lot of other things were easy out there. This wasn't one of them, so that was the goal. I would say that over the past 10 years or so that we've been building the company, it's really been about making good on that promise. So like expanding kind of the portfolio of products that we have, helping employers deal with more sophisticated situations. But then where I think things really changed for us was around the pandemic, and in particular around trends on remote hiring and international hiring. So before 2020, it was more or less the case that you could say that big companies, conglomerates and multinationals, they would hire people all over the world, but 10-person companies didn't. And then, the combination of the pandemic and the remote work environment and what was already starting to trend in terms of international hiring made it so, we're based in New York, like what really is the difference between hiring somebody in like Buffalo or Toronto? Like they're 90 minutes away, same time zone. Like in theory, they should kind of be the same, but they're obviously totally different. And so that was really like the first time where we had to look and say, okay, the world is changing. If we don't change like this, there's going to be a day that comes where we're just going to be literally irrelevant. And so, that's where we've been. I think in terms of what is coming, I think a lot about how Gen Z is different than millennials and what, as they become a bigger and bigger part of the workforce, what they're going to want. I think that's going to be really important for us. And then to kind of the point that, Steve, you were making about how are you positioning your product kind of like at different times? I was thinking as you were saying that about all these huge corporations that have been around for 50 years or longer that have somehow navigated all of these cycles that we've been through. And they have the same products or evolved products, but they know how to sell and they know how to operate in all these different environments. And so, for us, it really is about kind of flexing with those environments and then trying to make sure we're ahead of the curve on stuff that's really changing.
Did Fred invest Union Square?
Eventually.
They did?
Yeah.
Okay, good, but not early enough. They should have come in earlier.
They probably should have.
How about you, Steve or Jake?
Yeah, just for the general landscape, I think I'll relate it a little to learning, but just in what's happened with the labor force pre and post COVID, right? There's kind of a few things: the macro climate, the ZIRP, zero interest rate, the way in which employers talked about their people 10 years ago was different than 5 years ago pre-pandemic, which is different than now. 5 years ago, when I knew we're starting to think about building a new company and I wanted to be in workforce management, we would get on calls with folks and they'd say, cool, you want to train our people through external resources. Sounds like a big market, but what if that takes away from the job and the time that they spend working for me? Okay, it's fair. That's never how I saw people. Someone's trying to learn to get better, but no problem. Okay, what if someone skills up too much to where they can go to the next job, right? And they can leave. And so all these questions would come up, and I didn't necessarily agree with it, but I understood that was the landscape. Next thing you know, everyone's remote. You don't have control over when someone wakes up, if they shower that day, what they wear on the bottom half of themselves when they show up for work.
How many other full-time jobs they have.
How many other full-time jobs that they have. And it got to a point where you have no choice but to trust your people with their time, right? And you're going to find out who's not working over a course of performance management reviews and do that. You have no choice but to figure out the fact that if they're not happy and you're not investing in their growth and you don't give them a pathway to make sure they do that, they're probably having 2 or 3 side jobs as it is anyway, especially if they're really talented. So all those questions went away after this environment, and thankfully they stayed away. It's just a new generation of folks coming in, leading companies, and working to get the best talent at the youngest age that they possibly can. So the world has gotten flat, and that lends itself to a lot of trust. And I do believe the employees that are really good and really smart coming out of places and really thoughtful are getting the best jobs, and they're going to be retained because those companies are finally doing things right. Last point I'll make is the skills gap has widened so much. If you have teams that are trying to catch up on what AI can do for them in a marketing lens, in an engineering lens, help with their sales calls, it's to the point where companies actually have no choice but to make sure they're doing right by the people, trusting them with their time, and hoping they're upskilling every single day so that they're better for their current job and the one they will take on. And so that was a big effect of COVID and the pendulum swing that gave employees a little more power at the time.
You all mentioned Gen Z, the new generation that's coming up. I think I was chatting with Tim about this, and the question was brought up, do we feel that right now is a time where the employees or the employers have more power? I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I'm not 100% sure on this. I think it's obviously been so unstable, like we were talking about, for the past 5 years. I guess it seems like right now we have more power than we used to, but it also feels like the entire configuration is pretty unstable. I think as it relates to Gen Z and kind of like the arrangement between the Gen Z workforce and sort of like the labor market in general, it feels like really unsettled to me. And so I think at some level, we're still in the process, maybe it's another year or two, maybe it's a little longer, to kind of settle into like a new way of working. But I think basically since 2019, it's been up in the air. And certainly for a while, there was this power dynamic that we were talking about. That does seem to have faded, for sure.
Yeah, I think you look at recent decisions around return to office, and I think that has to get interpreted as CEOs believing they have a mandate or that they have the balance of power in that relationship. I'll go back to one thing that was said just a moment ago. I think that the traditional contract, figuratively speaking, between employer and employee is just going through a fundamental shift. I think we went through, a century-long period where that figurative labor contract, you give me this, and in exchange I will pay you this, it's shifting. And it's shifting because we're tethered to our devices. It's shifting because of like this, work-life balance has become work-life integration. And, it's just, I think we're trying to figure out what the new normal is in that, again, that figurative contractual relationship between employers and employees. And so I think that's a big part of it. I think that it is a little bit of you called it a stalemate, I think, right? You have, on one hand, CEOs saying, hey, we're pulling everybody back to the office because we think that we have the power. And on the other hand, you have employees who are like embracing this trend of like quiet quitting or whatever the new in vogue term is, which is, hey, cool, I'm gonna work from Buffalo, but you know what? I'm gonna probably give you about 20 hours a week. You know, I'm gonna do the bare minimum that I can, and actually maybe 20 hours is a good week. I might be doing 10 on a lot of the other weeks. And I'm not saying like that's what everybody's doing, but I think that there's enough data out there. I saw this recent article about like OpenTable, right? There's been a 400% increase in reservations booked between 12 and 5 p.m. on Fridays over the last 2 years. There's only one thing that explains that. People aren't working. Maybe that's okay. Like, I'm not up here to tell you that's right, wrong, or indifferent, but it's a thing. It's happening. So the result, again, is that there's a shift that's happening in that traditional contract or relationship between employer and employee. How it shakes out over the next 3 to 5 years, I don't really know, but it's interesting. I've always been very fortunate. The 2 companies that I've founded and run have always been very mission-driven. We've done our best to pay people well, but when we can also pay people in, actually being inspired by the work that they do, like it's actually less about a power dynamic between me as a CEO and them as an employee. It's really about like a shared sense of purpose, because we all truly believe in what we're doing. And anybody here, which is probably the most of you that have served in the military, like you understand that that's what gets people to go above and beyond. So like for me, it's just always been a little bit different.
Has your military were you going to say something, Steve?
Just a little nugget on that. I had a conversation with my wife the other day, who works remotely for a great tech company. And she was complaining to me she didn't have enough time during the day and tethered to her device and all that stuff. I quickly reminded her, just my mindset towards this. Remember when we were all in office and we used to complain we had too many meetings because we couldn't get our individual work done? It's happened to everyone. Now we're remote, and if she doesn't have a meeting for another hour, she can take the dog to the groomer, right? And then come back to make the meeting, because that's what's in her calendar and has to be there. So I think individuals are trying to figure it out. Companies are trying to figure it out. I don't know if it's right or wrong. It's probably somewhere in the middle, but it's an interesting piece. And then just another little nugget with power dynamics. During the crazy times when everyone was hiring, founders didn't have to be as transparent about their business when recruiting employees. You could throw a sliver of equity to someone and say, we're backed by Andreessen Horowitz, let's get going. And then that all falls apart, which I don't know which power that sways into. That doesn't happen anymore, and I'm glad it doesn't. So it's kind of back to the basics about what it is. Obviously, when you're bringing people in on equity and ownership, they should understand all the pieces around that. But we don't see that kind of competitive nature when recruiting people. You have to obviously spend time to get to know them, but there's no competition in, hey, this group has a ridiculous valuation and they give me this much equity, and so I'm doing that with my life, because that didn't work out a lot.
Do you think your military backgrounds have helped shape your company to where it is right now and put the importance on empowerment? Jake, you're kind of smiling a little bit. Let's hear from you first.
Yeah, I remember somebody asked me a question once. They asked why I felt qualified to be an entrepreneur, and I kind of thought about it. And first of all, I was offended because I had just scaled one of the fastest growing nonprofits in the country, right? We ran a $55 million P&L. We had recruited 180,000 volunteers, and we were running 300 disaster operations a year. Like, fuck you, I'm not an entrepreneur. Like, it was a weird question. But instead I answered it. I said, I learned how to be an entrepreneur running a sniper team in Sangin in 2008 in the Helmand Valley. I don't think they'd ever heard that answer before. And they asked me to explain. I said, listen, you got a small team, limited resources, limited information, can't fail mission, surrounded by ambiguity. It's entrepreneurship. You have to figure it out. You have to improvise, adapt and overcome. All those things that we say, all those ditties from the military, like, that's entrepreneurship. And that guy did not give me a term sheet. But I have since, I've answered that same question now with that same answer multiple times, because in the moment, it felt right, and in hindsight, it was absolutely the right answer.
I think what my service has done for me is it helped me understand myself a little bit more. And this is not unique. If you read John McCain's book, he figured out what he wanted to do with his life after being a pilot, because he was bored and had some time to think on a ship and things like this. But for me, as someone younger going into service, I had an opportunity one day to brief a DASD, Deputy Secretary, under of Defense at the Pentagon. Very high level, very strategic, very high vis for all your performance management reviews. That was actually not what was getting me up in the morning. I was going to do it. I was going to do a great job. And then I'd go deploy with a smaller special operations team to do counterproliferation efforts. And I felt the team of 6 people that couldn't fail in their mission were counting on me for the right information. Intelligence officer, by the way, right? So not going outside the wire, but informing the folks that I really cared about to do this stuff. And that's where I found out, you know, what mission-driven came down to and where my place in the world would be. There's no way that I could be a consultant in the aspect of where I'm giving you PowerPoint presentations, walking away and hoping that I did a great job, going to drinks if it's a Thursday or Friday, right? So I kind of had to be in the trenches, working with people at the right thing, and then hope to scale multiple organizations to the point where everybody feels that on a day-to-day basis and just gets stuff done. So for me, the leadership was getting put in with those opportunities and understanding where I fit, and then leveraging those skills in my career beyond.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that probably 80% plus of what I knew about leadership or what I'd practiced about leadership on the day that I started my company had come from my time in the military. So I was in the Guard, and I think the Army has, you know, they really have leadership down to a discipline. And I think that, you know, the ability to bring people along on a mission towards an objective and have them put the team above themselves, which is what the military is all about, was a huge part of our early success, and I think a huge part of the culture even today, and I'm very grateful for that.
What are the key metrics or data points that you focus on to gauge the empowerment and satisfaction of your clients?
So for us, this has always been the Net Promoter Score. So we've been, this is probably one of the first features that we coded in our app back in 2013, was like the Net Promoter Score box. And we've always looked at it by both all users and then just people that are, we call them admins, but basically the owners of the businesses. And we've always scored, as you've typically been in the 70s, which is pretty good. And it's especially good in an industry that has like a 0 average. And this is like, you know, a scale that goes negative. So that's been the big one, and we basically built it into the system from day one, and that's been the one. So we look at other stuff, but it really comes down to NPS.
Yeah, I didn't know that NPSs could be negative. So when you joke about like it's around 0, it probably is. Or it could. Learning and development, on average, the NPS is -8 in the industry, right? And we started a company because we knew this wasn't working for everybody. So NPS for us is huge. But the way that we think about it is we're there to serve human resource, people operations, the business aspect. But our real users, the people at the end of the day who are benefiting from this the most, are individual users, employees, from IC to manager up the executive chain. And so when we measure NPS, we're doing it with everyone, not just the buyer, not just the person who's funding it, that signs the contract, but everyone across the board. We tie our business model to that as well. So you have to use the platform in order for us to get paid. And so we're very confident in making a seamless platform. But in general, I would say NPS, CSAT, of course, churn and retention of the actual customers is important, but at the end of the day, the code we're trying to crack and what we track against is engagement and satisfaction, and we don't believe anybody's done it. You could be really high in engagement, or you could be really high in satisfaction. There hasn't been a tool that's high in satisfaction and engagement in corporate learning world, and so that's what we're going after with our product and our distribution.
Yeah, we took, we haven't leaned into the NPS as much. We tried to really carve out a presence on G2, one of like these top, you know, kind of ratings sites for different software verticals and platforms. And, you know, we have a pretty crowded space. It's dominated by 3 legacy players. And we set out a goal to become the highest rated platform on G2, which means like, hey, a couple things have to happen. You have to have a good product. And then your customers have to respond when you ask them to leave a review, right? So like it's kind of interesting, right? You have to implement them well. You have to be delivering your services well. They have to care enough about you and your product to even just respond to the email. and open it, and then go one step further to like go to this third-party website and leave this review. And we became the highest-rated platform on G2 a couple quarters after we took that goal. And it's always really, it's amazing to me because these reviews will come in, and I've done this for other people. You kind of mail it in. You write like 7 words, like, oh yeah, this product is great. These people will write paragraphs and paragraphs about what our platform's doing for them, and it's just above and beyond what we actually just asked them to do, which is like, hey, if you enjoyed the experience, would you go leave us a 5-star review? And so it's really that, you go in there and you see the quality of the review that's been left, and it's this indication that they value the partnership beyond just like, yeah, I will do this you this favor. It's, no, I actually really value what you've done, and I think that leaving this review is going to provide that same value to some future reader of this review. A little less scientific.
I mean, one thing that I think is certainly true in our space and probably many of your spaces is that there's the buyer, so in the HR department or whoever, and then there are all the users of the product, which can be many times that number of people. I always think about this, like if I were in Manhattan and I had like everybody on JustWorks was wearing like an orange shirt, like how many people would be walking down the street in an orange shirt? And the answer is like a lot of them. And so delivering a great experience, not just for your buyer and getting good reviews from your buyer, but being able to deliver a great experience for all the people who interact with you can have a pretty extraordinary multiplier effect, because these are people who are going to leave their job and they're going to go to a new company. These are the people who are going to ideally have a riot if the company decides to churn off your platform. And so, like they all matter, but I think if you have this kind of like two-sided customer base, there's a lot that you can do there as well.
That's just very important. As I was thinking about this stuff for the platforms that have a lot of users, starting to get employees that go to new companies and say, we need this, to the actual buyer is important. Believe me, no one that comes off ADP Workforce Now is going to their next employer and saying, I had a great experience. But they are with a platform like JustWorks, which is very important. And it's almost, as we've seen actually recently, almost as important as the target customer, VP of learning, right? Because they only have so many transitions. But the thousands of people that are using the platform go to their next company and start talking about it. If they have a good experience, kind of judged by a CSAT and NPS, you're going to get some leads that you wouldn't have normally thought of. So there's a business case for that. And a lot of software companies kind of leave that to the side, right? If you're SaaS and not building that way.
What sort of technology did you all utilize when building out your platforms, or what's, a tech platform that the audience should know about?
I can start. So we built a platform on Rails, which I think is possibly laughable at this time. We chose Rails. I chose Rails because at the time there was a proliferation of people who knew how to program in it. In particular in New York City at all these coding schools, and my number one problem was that I needed people to be able to develop the software, and I thought something that was easy and readable would be good. I will tell you now, 12 years later, the company is in the midst of a sort of agonizing replatforming. And so I think kind of no matter where you start, you probably have to deal with this to some degree, but it was an excellent decision at the time.
If you've heard of the tool Figma or InVision, these kind of UI, UX tools that you can put together prototypes really quick, they're just screenshots, but the way in which you put screenshots together, you can actually prototype them. So when I was in business school, 2013 through 15, it was generally understood you should do customer discovery and understand their pain points and get their feedback before you build a product. Awesome. If you try to apply that today, people give you generic feedback based on what you're telling them and what they think. If you put something in front of them and let them click, or you click on a Zoom and screen share, they'll give you more pinpointed feedback. Hey, that's not what I was talking about. Hey, I thought that button would take me here. This is important to me. And you could do it, and we probably did 40 to 50 discovery calls with head of learning development before we started even choosing our tech stack at that point. And I can tell you when we started doing that and implementing it, because feedback got generic before that, most people actually did not know that it wasn't a web application. They just saw me clicking around. They're like, wow, it moves really fast. Or wow, I love the analytics that you have on it. Fake numbers, fake everything. Fraction of the cost if you can't do it yourself. Now AI is building it for us, right? So you don't even need a really good designer to do that. But those type of tools are amazing, especially at the early stage, to basically fake out a prototype. And not that you're trying to hide it, it's just that good.
Yeah, I'll respond first to the tongue-in-cheek answer, which is the most important technology we implemented early was an office. I'm just super bullish on being in person, and I think that it was one of the best decisions we made. At the height, peak, the world will be remote forever. We took the contrarian view that we're going to build an in-person team in LA, and it was agonizing, but it has paid such high dividends, and would double down on that. But going back to technology, I think, and circling back to a previous part of our conversation, if you're not using an AI video recorder to record all of your sales calls, and of course it depends what your go-to-market motion is and everything like that, that is both helping you by transcribing your call, pulling out key insights, pulling out key action items, et cetera, that you can come back and revisit, you need to. But the more important element of it for me is going back to that transparency. Every single sales call that we do gets posted into a public Slack channel, good, bad, or ugly. Every single person in the company can see a sales call that I'm on where I get murdered by a prospect, made to look like a fool. But conversely, they get visibility into all the positive insights and reactions that we're getting from hundreds of sales calls a year. Not everybody reads them, or not everybody goes back and watches them, but everybody reads through the notes, which again are being generated by that AI without that bias, right? So I can come back and tell people, I had a great call with this prospect. Well, show them the receipts. And it's just been transformative for us in how much better we build the products, how much more trust we have across the team, really creating that shared consciousness so that everybody knows what's going on with the pipeline at all times.
Awesome. We will open the floor up for questions soon, so if you do have questions, please stand behind the mics. Feedback has been mentioned quite a lot throughout our panel. I know it's really important. Are you guys actively available to listen to your customers' feedback? Like, how are you opening up conversations? How are you implementing the feedback? Have you ever gotten really negative feedback that made you think, oh, this is very valid, I should kind of focus in on this more? I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
One of the things that I started doing about a year ago, and I did it because I had to fire my sales team and my marketing team, going back to that painful part, was we just started taking this like build in public approach, that some founders have started to talk about. So our primary marketing channel is basically me talking on LinkedIn to our audience. And an element of that is then, building in public. So like showing demos that all of our competitors can see as well, but soliciting input and reactions from all of their customers. And again, it's a space that I came from. I spent 10 years in that space, so I know like all the Fortune 500 people that work in corporate social responsibility. I know half of them, and 90% of them are on one of my competitors. But we're connected on LinkedIn, so going through this kind of this build in public approach, one, they get to see everything that we're doing. They see all the innovation that's happening. They see the pace of innovation that we're doing. But the amount of feedback that we get in real time, positive, negative, indifferent, is really powerful. And it's just really built a buzz in our industry for what we're doing. Not just where we're at today, but where people think that we're going, because they can see the progress in real time. It's just been a really, really powerful tool for us.
Yeah, someone on our team who's sitting right here, John, was insightful enough to come in and realize that the surveys we were sending out or the NPS scores that we're getting through our platform were lacking the actual feedback that we needed. And we have G2 and you can get some feedback and everything like that. But we have a lot of engineers that ask questions that want to make sure they're building the right things that people want. So they say, do users say this? Do users say this? John was smart enough to send out surveys where we get the NPS score feedback and then ask the very specific question, are you willing to talk to us more about this? So we have a list of people that care enough that we could call on to have conversations with and maybe even bring an engineer onto the call to solve it in a different way. I think that's been awesome. The other piece is, if you lose a customer, key customer, and you think you have a relationship, this happened to us recently, you get on the phone and you say, hey, what happened? That was kind of abrupt. Is there something we can help with? How do we stay in contact? We loved working with you. And I had to, fortunately or unfortunately, do one of those going from December to January. We lost a key customer that we had worked with for about 2.5 years, and they were scaling up, and we were really serving their people well. So we were a little confused as to why it happened. Sure enough, that chief people officer got on the phone. They told us the issues they were having, what they were trying to do, and it actually had nothing to do with the platform or what we thought it was. It was a consolidation approach to a new platform that wasn't working out. And guess what? That individual is open for touching base to get on the platform for next year as soon as the new contract expires with that group. All that is to say is whether before the contract renewal or after, customers do want to be heard, and they don't expect you to be perfect, but if you hear them out, there's a lot of respect and justification that comes from doing that. And they know, especially if you're an early stage company, that you're building and developing a product towards their needs, and that's vastly important.
I think we have a question right there.
Thank you. Mike McPherson, founder of Effectiveness First. We build a software that measures effectiveness because we believe that the top line is more important than the bottom line. What I mean is a holistic picture of the organization and measuring everything in the organization. And I think what you all do is very interesting because you are selling cost centers, very specifically when it comes to donation. So my question is, how do you convince your customers that you have to focus on more than just the bottom line to increase your overall health of your organization and overall effectiveness?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's an astute point, right? We're not driving revenue at these companies, so you do have to make the argument that this is making your organization more excellent. For us, it can be challenging. You are literally just asking people to give money away. I think in our case, though, our ICP today are customers that are companies that have been doing this for years. BNY Mellon, our newest big enterprise customer, 55,000 employees, they give away $20 million a year. We help them do it more effectively. We help them do it in a way that's going to inspire their employees more. So it's really about, you are going to allocate this budget to charity regardless. What are you getting for it? And so it's that argument for us there. I mean, that's, it's inspiring employees, it's engaging them, it's doing all these other things, it's building up their corporate reputation, et cetera. Increasingly important because CEOs are always under, the microscope and being attacked. So this is depositing goodwill capital in their goodwill piggy bank to be deployed later. I'm curious how you would approach that.
Yeah, I think groups like human resources and benefits, payroll, kind of everything across the human capital aspect is a cost center because you can't directly tie it to anything that happens on the top line or bottom line. Until today. Now we have enough data to know how productive people are, what internal promotion rates look like automatically, literally with integrating with these groups, so we know what that looks like. The other piece is we have an enterprise sale motion, right? So we're gonna get on a discovery call, we're gonna go through demos, and we're actually gonna help you build a business case. And we don't think we're smart enough that we know everyone's business case before we talk to you. So some groups have trouble hiring, right? They're competing with Amazon, they don't have the budget. How are they gonna do it better? Other groups have problem with retention. Our best engineers keep leaving. Others have problem with productivity, or they're just scared to death that they don't know how to train engineers that are 4 levels down, just coming on, asking for it at all times. So customizing those 4 or 5 business cases that we see a lot for each company is going to help them internally justify how it's going to help the top line. And a lot of times, look, it is the bottom line. Like if you can retain folks, not have to pay a recruiter to bring on more engineers, and not have to deal with the headache of training people up again, that's going to affect things, and it goes beyond just a learning culture. It does translate into the top line and bottom line. Deloitte did a study, companies that have a learning culture, loosely defined by the way, and we'll get there at some point, are 54% more productive and 17% more profitable. So a lot of it is hitting the bottom line, even if growth can't be controlled as much by what it is we do, besides freeing up people's time and getting them the right pieces. Was that okay?
One more question.
Hi, James. I represent a company called Aerotech. I actually was a JustWorks employee, officially, unofficially, when I was with Human First. So great experience. As a PEO, I didn't even know those existed. I was like, who's JustWorks on my paycheck? It was really cool. In terms of the current market, right? And the current environment around, I guess we can just call it HR. You know, is there a moment where, as leaders, you take a step back and say, okay, we have to look at this differently from like a different vertical because AI is disrupting it, or because the administration's coming out with different messaging, right? I saw a post of a lady, she commented that she took away her gender identity off her LinkedIn because she didn't want to, she was a B2B salesperson, right? And she got really a lot of flack for that. And it's like, own it or don't own it. Anyway, long story short is, at what point do you say, okay, we've grown enough to where we're good, we don't need to be affected by the disruption in the market, whatever that is, or we need to go back and look and do this again and build in public and iterate over and over and over again, even at the growth that we're at right now?
I mean, it's hard to imagine a company that achieves a scale where it doesn't have to deal with changes in the external environment. And I would actually argue that I think actually as you get bigger, you are more impacted by the external environment. I think when you're in the earlier days, at least for us, like I felt like you could generate a lot of alpha based on what you're doing, but the bigger you get, the more you're subject to these forces. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that there's a huge amount of change in the environment right now and a huge amount of uncertainty like we were talking about. And I think our team should be prepared to be extremely responsive so that we can continue doing what we need to do for our customers and the people that work for them, regardless of what is happening out there.
Let's take a really scaled up company. We probably walked by most of the buildings this morning, but Salesforce announced this morning they're laying off 1,000 people, and then they're rehiring what are AI sales folks to push the new AI products, right? So that's an adjustment to a market that we've long seen coming. By long, I mean 18 months have seen coming, but constant adjustments to make that work. When you're smaller, you're just more nimble, you can build it in more places, but you have to adjust a little bit more, almost on a customer-to-customer basis. I'll use an analogy from my old baseball playing days. The better you are at what you do, and this is regardless of size, but listening to the market, a high school baseball player basically adjusts from inning to inning. So you strike out one inning, you come back the next inning, you hope to be a little bit better. At the college level, you're adjusting from at bat to at bat, whenever that is. And at professional level, it's pitch to pitch, which is why A-Rod's so good. Throw an outside pitch, throw an inside pitch. He's adjusting every single time that happens. And I think when you're small, you don't have much of a choice because every customer matters. So you're adjusting your sales pitch, you're adjusting your product, you're adjusting where you want to go with the roadmap and trying to keep it as steady as possible for that period of time. But it's all adjusting to the market. You're just trying not to swing with the big swings that aren't going to be around for a while.
Okay, the last question to round out our panel. Steve, give some insight to these founders, to these employers. Based on your data, what's the #1 course that employees want to upskill?
Yeah, I actually looked at it this morning, and I do this quite a bit. On our platform, we have over 1,200 different providers and 25,000 different resources. We don't see anything quote unquote trending for any period of time more than like 2 or 3 days. Books are a rare example, but unlike a lot of what we see in the market, there are 2 categories that are very high that I don't think people realize, and there are tons of course providers for this. One is leadership and management, so first-time managers doing performance reviews, constructive feedback, or just seeing if they're the people manager type is very highly sought after both by HR teams and users. The other piece is just business applications, right? So everyone wants to be on the next thing and use the next GPT and how do we get more productive? People are still upskilling in Excel and PowerPoint and design, right? And we do that every day, sometimes without knowing it. When you Google how do you do this in PowerPoint, that's that. There's just tons of resources that are just up to date, and there'll always be those kind of demands for that stuff.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you, Isaac. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Jake. These are busy folks, so corner them to learn more about how to empower your team. Make sure you catch them at the conference. Thank you so much. Let's give a round of applause.
Thank you.